Right now, as you are watching this, a volcano that has not erupted in over 700,000 years is showing signs that it may be waking up. Taftan volcano, sitting in a remote corner of eastern Iran near the border with Afghanistan, has just been confirmed by scientists to be undergoing real, measurable unrest, uplift strong enough that researchers are calling for its risk level to be completely reassessed. This isn't a small local news story. This is a volcano long assumed to be essentially extinct, now showing behavior that has never been documented there before in recorded scientific history. Today, we're going to break down exactly what scientists found, how they found it, why this volcano was barely being monitored at all until now, and what this could mean for the region around it. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the data, and what it actually means. Before we get into it, drop a comment right now. Had you ever even heard of Taftan volcano before today? Tell me where you're watching from. If you want to be the first to know every time the Earth does something like this, subscribe. It's completely free, and it genuinely helps this channel grow. Let's go for 5,000 likes on this one, so the algorithm puts it in front of people who need to see it. Thank you. Now, let's get into it. Taftan is a stratovolcano, rising to roughly 13,000 feet, located along a stretch of terrain called the Makran subduction zone, a roughly 275-mile-long arc, where an oceanic plate is slowly being forced beneath the Eurasian plate along the coast of the Indian Ocean. For the vast majority of its history, Taftan simply wasn't considered a priority for volcanic monitoring. Its last confirmed eruption was over 700,000 years ago, a timescale so long that, geologically speaking, most scientists treated it as dormant bordering on extinct. It also sits in an extremely remote, sparsely populated part of the world, which meant it never received the kind of dense, ground-based monitoring network that volcanoes like Etna in Italy or Kilauea in Hawaii have had for decades. For a long time, if Taftan was changing at all, almost nobody would have known. That changed because of satellites. A team of researchers used a technique called InSAR, which stands for Interferometric Synthetic Aperture Radar, a method that allows scientists to measure ground deformation from orbit by comparing radar images of the same location taken at different times. Even tiny changes in elevation, sometimes just millimeters, show up clearly when you compare enough of these radar snapshots against each other. Using this method, researchers detected rapid uplift near Taftan's summit occurring between July of 2023 and May of 2024, a genuinely significant finding for a volcano assumed to be geologically quiet. Here's where the research gets particularly careful, and this is exactly the kind of detail that separates real science from a scary headline. Ground can shift for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with volcanic activity, heavy rainfall soaking into soil, regional earthquakes, shifting the crust, even seasonal groundwater changes. So the research team specifically developed an analysis method designed to filter out noise caused by atmospheric conditions, and then checked whether rainfall or nearby earthquake activity could explain what they were seeing. According to the study, published in the peer-reviewed journal Geophysical Research Letters, neither rainfall nor earthquakes were responsible for the uplift they detected. That's an important finding, because it means the most likely remaining explanation is that something is genuinely moving beneath Taftan itself, magma, hydrothermal fluid, or gas, pushing upward and physically deforming the ground above it. The lead researchers were direct in their conclusions, stating plainly that their findings reveal Taftan is more active than previously recognized. That's a notable statement for a volcano that many scientific databases had effectively filed away as inactive. The study's authors have also pointed out that this discovery highlights an urgent need to revise the current volcanic risk assessment for the entire Makran subduction arc, not just Taftan alone, since the same lack of monitoring infrastructure that allowed this unrest to go undetected for months likely applies to other volcanic systems along that same stretch of coastline. It's worth being precise here about what this uplift does and does not tell us. Detecting ground deformation is not the same thing as predicting an eruption. Plenty of volcanoes around the world experience uplift, seismic swarms, or gas emission changes that persist for months or even years without ever leading to an eruption, sometimes referred to as volcanic unrest, that simply settles back down on its own. What makes this specific case scientifically significant isn't a prediction that Taftan is about to erupt tomorrow. It's the discovery that a volcano long assumed to be essentially dead is, in fact, geologically alive enough to produce measurable, unexplained ground movement. That alone is enough to justify placing Taftan under far closer scrutiny than it has ever received before. This case also highlights a much bigger problem in volcanology worldwide, something researchers sometimes describe using the phrase zombie volcanoes, systems that display intermittent signs of unrest for years or even decades without ever fully erupting or ever being declared completely safe. Just like this Taftan discovery, cases like these tend to reveal a similar underlying issue that a huge number of the world's volcanoes, particularly ones in remote, Low population regions simply don't have the ground-based monitoring infrastructure that well-studied, frequently active volcanoes enjoy. Satellite-based methods like InSAR are becoming absolutely critical precisely because they can watch remote, poorly instrumented volcanoes from orbit, providing at least some baseline data in places where building a dense network of ground sensors would be prohibitively expensive or logistically difficult. For context on what a truly active, well-monitored volcanic system looks like right now, compare Taftan to Mount Etna in Sicily, one of the most closely watched volcanoes on Earth. Etna has been in a state of continuous, well-documented unrest for years, producing strong explosive activity and ash emissions repeatedly throughout this year alone, closely tracked hour by hour by Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology using dense networks of seismometers, tilt meters, and gas sensors. The difference between Etna and Taftan isn't necessarily that one is more dangerous than the other in this moment. It's that scientists actually have the data to say with confidence exactly what Etna is doing at any given time, while Taftan, until this satellite study, was essentially a blind spot. It's worth taking a moment to properly explain how InSAR actually works, because it's one of the most powerful tools modern volcanology has, and most people have never heard of it. A satellite equipped with a synthetic aperture radar instrument sends radar pulses down toward the ground and measures how long it takes for the signal to bounce back, along with the phase of the returning wave. When the same satellite, or a matching one in the same orbital family, passes over the exact same location again weeks or months later, scientists can compare the phase of the two radar signals against each other. If the ground has shifted even slightly in the time between those two passes, the phase comparison reveals it as a distinct interference pattern. And by mapping that pattern across an entire region, researchers can build a detailed picture of exactly where the ground has risen, sunk, or stayed put. The technique is sensitive enough to detect vertical ground movement of just a few millimeters, which is precisely why it can pick up the kind of subtle volcanic uplift that would be completely invisible to the naked eye, and why it's become one of the primary tools for monitoring volcanoes that don't have dense networks of ground-based sensors. The trade-off is that satellite passes aren't continuous, they happen on a fixed repeat cycle, which is part of why the unrest at Taftan was measured as a change between July 2023 and May 2024, rather than tracked in real time day by day, the way seismometers at a well-instrumented volcano like Etna can be. The Makran subduction zone itself deserves some additional context, because Taftan isn't an isolated curiosity sitting in a vacuum. It's part of a broader tectonic system that stretches across a genuinely significant and historically underappreciated seismic hazard zone. This roughly 275-mile stretch of coastline, spanning parts of southeastern Iran and southwestern Pakistan, has produced major earthquakes in the past, including a large tsunami-generating earthquake in 1945 that caused significant damage and loss of life along the coast. Despite that history, the Makran region has historically received far less scientific attention and monitoring investment than better-known subduction zones, like those off the coast of Japan or the Pacific Northwest of the United States, largely due to its remote geography and the political and logistical challenges of establishing dense monitoring networks across the border regions of Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. This new Taftan finding adds volcanic unrest to a region already recognized as carrying meaningful seismic risk, which is part of why the study's authors specifically called for revising risk assessments across the entire arc, not treating Taftan as an isolated case study. Taftan isn't the only volcano in recent years to reveal itself as more active than previously believed, after decades of being written off as essentially dormant. Researchers have documented similar cases at other so-called zombie volcanoes around the world, systems that show intermittent seismic swarms, gas emissions, or ground deformation for years or even decades, occasionally triggering evacuation preparations or heightened alert levels without ever crossing the line into a full eruption. These cases tend to share a common thread with what's happening at Taftan right now, a volcano assumed safe based on incomplete historical data, only to be revealed as genuinely active once modern instruments, whether satellite-based or ground-based, finally get pointed in its direction. This is part of why volcanologists are often cautious about ever declaring a volcano permanently extinct, since the geological record used to make that determination is frequently far less complete than it might first appear, especially in remote regions where past eruptions may simply never have been documented or dated with precision. For the communities living near Taftan, this discovery carries real, practical weight beyond the scientific interest. The region surrounding the volcano is sparsely populated, compared to many other volcanic hazard zones around the world. But it is not empty, and any meaningful increase in volcanic hazard has direct implications for the people who call this remote corner of Iran home. Establishing better monitoring infrastructure isn't just an academic exercise. It's the difference between having weeks or months of advance warning if activity were ever to escalate significantly versus having almost no warning at all, the exact situation that existed before this satellite study was conducted. That's precisely why the push for expanded ground-based monitoring across the Makran arc matters so much practically. Not because an eruption is considered imminent, but because right now, if something did change quickly at Taftan, there would be very little existing infrastructure in place to catch it early. This is also a good moment to talk about the earthquake risk tied to this same region, because Taftan doesn't sit in isolation. It sits inside a zone with a documented history of major, damaging earthquakes. The Makran subduction zone has produced significant seismic events in the past, most notably a major earthquake in 1945 that struck off the coast near the Iran-Pakistan border, generating a tsunami that caused serious damage and loss of life along the coastline. Subduction zones like this one are exactly the kind of environment that can produce both volcanic activity and major earthquakes, because the same underlying process, one tectonic plate grinding beneath another, builds up enormous stress that can release either as a sudden, violent earthquake along the fault itself, or as magma and fluid movement feeding volcanic systems like Taftan sitting above it. This is part of why the study's authors specifically called for expanded monitoring across the entire arc rather than treating Taftan as an isolated case, because a subduction zone capable of producing serious earthquake activity is, almost by definition, a region where any new sign of unrest, whether seismic or volcanic, deserves serious scientific attention. Right now, most independent seismic monitoring in this specific stretch of the Makran remains limited, which means, much like the volcanic unrest at Taftan itself, any building earthquake risk in this exact region could similarly go undetected for far longer than it would in a more heavily instrumented part of the world. Understanding this connection between volcanic unrest and earthquake risk is important context for how professionals in this field actually think, because the two are rarely treated as separate, unrelated hazards in a region like this one. A stratovolcano sitting directly above an active subduction zone is physically connected to the same tectonic forces capable of generating major earthquakes nearby, which is exactly why comprehensive monitoring networks, when they do exist, typically track both seismic activity and ground deformation together rather than focusing on just one hazard in isolation. It's also worth noting that this Taftan discovery is landing during a period when volcanic activity is making headlines in several other places at once, which helps put the broader picture in perspective. In the Philippines, Taal Volcano, one of only 16 volcanoes worldwide, officially designated a decade volcano because of its history of destructive eruptions and its proximity to dense population centers, has recorded numerous isolated eruptive events so far this year, most of them phreatic eruptions, meaning explosive steam bursts caused by water interacting with hot rock or magma beneath its crater lake, rather than the lava fountains people often picture when they hear the word eruption. In Hawaii, Kilauea has continued its long-running pattern of episodic lava fountaining at its summit, with individual episodes producing fountains hundreds of feet high before pausing, a pattern the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory has been tracking closely for months. And Etna, as we mentioned, has been in a state of strong, sustained unrest for weeks, prompting repeated aviation warnings across Sicily. None of this means the planet as a whole is becoming more volcanically dangerous in some coordinated way. Volcanic activity at this general global scale happens continuously, every single year. What it does mean is that this is simply what an active period looks like, when you're paying close attention, multiple systems around the world, each driven by its own completely independent geological process, generating real, newsworthy activity within the same general window of time. What makes Taftan stand out against that backdrop isn't the scale of its current activity, which remains far more subtle than the dramatic fountaining at Kilauea or the ongoing eruptions at Taal. It's the surprise factor. Etna, Taal, and Kilauea are all volcanoes that scientists already knew intimately, tracked continuously, with decades of baseline data to compare against. Taftan was, until this study, essentially a blank spot on that map, a volcano assumed quiet enough that almost no one was watching closely. The real headline here isn't that a volcano is becoming dangerous, it's that our understanding of which volcanoes even deserve close attention in the first place just got meaningfully revised. And that's a genuinely bigger deal for the field of volcanology than any single eruption happening at a well-studied volcano this week. So what happens next? Researchers are calling for expanded monitoring across the Makran volcanic arc, potentially including new ground-based instruments to complement the satellite data that first revealed this unrest. Continued InSAR monitoring will also almost certainly continue, tracking whether the uplift detected between 2023 and 2024 has continued, paused, or reversed since then. This is exactly the kind of situation where patient, ongoing observation matters far more than any single dramatic headline. because the real answer to whether Taftan poses a genuine hazard will only become clear over months and years of continued data collection, not from a single satellite pass. At the end of the day, this is a genuinely remarkable reminder of how much we still don't know about our own planet. A volcano dormant for 700,000 years, sitting quietly in one of the most sparsely monitored corners of the globe, was still moving, still alive, still doing something scientists never expected. And we only found out because a satellite happened to be watching from hundreds of miles above. There are almost certainly other volcanoes out there right now, in equally remote corners of the world, doing something similar, completely unnoticed, simply because nobody has pointed the right instrument at them yet. We'll keep watching Taftan and the broader Makran region closely, and bring you an update the moment anything meaningfully changes. If this kind of grounded, fact-first coverage is something you want more of, subscribing genuinely helps this channel keep making it. Let's try to hit 5,000 likes on this one together. Thank you so much for watching this. Stay curious, stay informed, and I will see you in the next one.